Used to not give a fuck about discretion. What the fuck, man?
Kind of in music news this week, like a much more recent thing, the Mars Volta just did something kind of similar to this, only kind of taking in the stuff out of the music company's mouth, if you will.
Right.
Yeah,
this is a really interesting story. And, you and I are both fans of the band, at least the early records. And so when I read that article, I was really intrigued, and I thought their reasoning for doing it is good, and I agree with it, but there's some other things about it that are sticking points. So I'm sorry to cut you off. Let's fill everybody in what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm as always, I'm really curious as to what gets your goat. But so Mars Volta, who has always complained about the way their records have come out, whether it was from the Louse and the Comatorium's record cover not being the way that it was designed,
yes,
to mixes not being finished, all kinds of complaints about.
So a lot of record label fuckery that they claim they have dealt with throughout their relationship with who was their label? Was it Universal?
I think it was. Without looking, I'm pretty sure that's who it was.
Yeah, that sounds right. But if we're wrong, so what? It happens a lot.
There'll be like a flashing font above Jason's head if we're wrong.
Right.
So I think you're right though. So, and it's not like it's news from a record label to do stuff like this.
Right.
Even small record labels, like if you want to go back to Mark Langen's story about Sub Pop using a picture they promised they wouldn't as a record cover.
Right. Swore up and down to him that, that they were going to use one thing, and then they basically intentionally just said, nah, we're going to do what we want to do.
Exactly. And so that's a really, and at the time they were even smaller than they were probably the smallest they ever were at that point.
Right.
And so you have a big corporation like Universal. Yeah. Even if
they're just going to steamroll,
sure.
a band like that and do whatever, because they're, particularly at that time, were so niche. I mean, you're talking about coming off the Tremulant EP, which was a great record, but first of all, it's an EP. So the record companies don't give a fuck about EPs. It's basically a throwaway, right?
Right.
It's a demo. It's like they know that they're not going to make any money off of it.
Well, and they were basically selling it. I mean, it might as well have been packaged with their previous band names on it. You know what I mean? They were basically, that's how that even that deal evolved.
Right.
They basically were just using
when At the Drive-In kind of crumbled.
That's right. They were basically just billed as At the Drive-In too,
right.
And that, I mean, I remember buying the Tremulant EP, and that's how it was sold to me from this indie record dealer. He's like, basically that's what he said.
Yeah. Shout out to Eric.
Yeah, totally. Who I love. And I mean, and frankly, that's what it is.
Yeah.
It evolves to be more.
Sure. Are some of those songs were probably written and developed towards the end of that life cycle of the band, I would imagine. And maybe that direction contributed to the splitting up of the kind of two factions of At the Drive-In, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you could definitely hear it. I mean, at the end of At the Drive-In, you can almost hear the two bands pulling apart from each other.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Super their big record was, I mean, it's one of those great records that there's a lot of tension on it, and you're like, you really can, like, knowing after the fact, you can feel like the wheels coming off. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it makes for great art.
I was just about to say that too.
Yeah, but it's ultimately that was the end. So for people who don't know, let's like break down their individual gripes. The first one that you mentioned was when Deloused came out.
Mm-hmm.
They had authorized the artwork, which ended up, if I'm correct about this, it ended up being the back cover of the record,
or an inside sleeve. I see, that part is really hard for me to understand, because there were a couple different versions released.
Yes.
So the CD itself had a couple different sleeves, but the original design was Mars Volta intended that you could pick up the record from either side.
Yes.
And it be the cover, as it were. So that's how it was designed, to be coverless almost, right? Or that
Right.
the art was so the front and back was so good and so indiscernible, that in its quality, that you wouldn't be sure whether you're looking at the front or the back.
Yeah, it kind of creates this ambiguity, which obviously kind of fits the sound of the band and maybe the image that they were going for, right?
It's certainly their intention.
Yeah.
And that they didn't do that. The record company decided on to use an inside cover photo.
For anybody who's not familiar, it's the same guy that shot the cover for Pink Floyd's "Wish You Were Here," the famous photograph of the two businessmen shaking hands and one of them's on fire. So he's a surrealist photographer. Was doing a lot of manipulation in a time where pre-Photoshop, right?
I'm looking really hard.
Strom Thorgerson.
Yeah. So he right, and he would go on to do other
yeah, he did Francis the Mute.
That's right. Yeah. And so so they were using his work, and they're really trying to honor it too. And they felt like a lot of times with cover art, it ends up being downgraded in a sense, and so they were really trying to honor that in the way they were presenting it, and they felt like
particularly in an age where I think CDs were still kind of the primary delivery.
Absolutely.
That stuff. So you have this, you're going to have to scale it all down anyway. So the covers tend to lose impact. I mean, holding an LP in your hand and looking at a gatefold is obviously a way more immersive experience than, trying to see what's on a CD jewel case.
Sure. The difference between at this point, like a really good analogy is the difference between your phone and a like the big screen in a movie theater, right?
That's a good one. That's a good one.
And so not just that, so the cover art itself was to them totally effed with, but then also the mixes were unfinished, or I can't remember if they were finished or they used a separate, like a mix that was unapproved.
Right. My understanding is that so when you master a record, nowadays you have to master it for multiple formats, because it's gonna project and sound different on vinyl than it is through a digital, which a CD ultimately is. It's a digital recording. So my understanding is that they had mastered it for CD, and rather than remastering it to go onto an analog format, they just used that digital master and pressed the LPs off of that. And as a result, I still think it sounds pretty fucking good, but they were not satisfied with the quality of it, and they felt that the record company had taken a shortcut.
Sure.
And that ultimately, did not present their art in the way that they had imagined it, right?
Absolutely. Well, it's funny too that it's no surprise to me that and basically you're looking at the two people that are Mars Volta. You have the guitar player, frontman, and the singer, basically, right?
Yeah.
That are
they're the creative force behind the band.
That's right. And at this point, they're the only, I mean, probably legally, but also contractually, the only members of the band,
right,
who are of any note. And these guys were notoriously strong-willed, maybe pig-headed by some.
Particular about the vision that they had for.
That's
which
right.
You could make the argument that's the reason for At the Drive-In splitting, right?
Yeah. I would say without a doubt. I mean, if it isn't, I'd be super surprised. And you have them. I mean, there's members of the ex-members of Mars Volta who talk about how difficult it was being in the studio with these guys, about how difficult it was touring with these guys. And I'm not surprised in the least that they're very particular about the way this is handled and laid out. But they did something really cool with that particularity, and they made this box set of all of their albums, the EP, and then unreleased material that's really like a fan, like you're not a true fan unless you have this bootleg in your collection, right?
Right.
And so they packaged all this stuff together in a really, really cool box set. It sits really nicely. All the art is taken care of really nicely as well. And, you know, honestly, for $500, it's kind of like on the cheaper end of these box sets.
Is it?
I think it is. I mean,
I saw that price tag on it and I went, no fucking way.
Well, so you said no fucking way, and then
it sold out instantly.
That's right. Every unit press sold right away.
Yeah.
So you know, either Mars Volta fans all became you know, bankers in the time between graduating college and now,
right?
Or you know, people saw an investment opportunity,
or
a mix of both.
It saved some of their stimmy check money and
right, and spent it on this. Somewhere there's some parent's basement being plagued by.
It's better than GameStop stock, right?
I guess so. But you know, I do think it's, you know, when I looked at the price, Jason, what I did was I took some, like, I Googled some just general facts of like how much it costs to press a record,
right?
How much it costs to print all that stuff.
Yep.
You know, I talked to some friends who like have some knowledge of some of that stuff, and basically, I don't see where they made any money off of this.
Okay.
You know,
even though, what was they did 5,000? Is that right?
Yeah. So it comes out to like 2,500,000 basically.
Right.
Is
2.5 mil is the net.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you come off of that with all the expenses, you don't really, I mean, especially if you're talking about paying engineers to make sure that the mix is right,
remaster all those. Yeah,
that's right. To do all that stuff from the ground up. You know, I don't know what the deal is with the artists, like if they had to repay people for photographs and that kind of thing, but there's not a lot of room for you know, profit on this deal. So I mean, I think it's, you know,
and that makes sense to me. Like, to break it down like that, my argument would be, and I said this to you in private, it's like, I'm not interested in paying $500 for one pretty good EP, two brilliant albums, and a bunch of self-indulgent nonsense that, you know, there's a reason nobody heard it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I tried to listen to those records. I mean, I have friends who love those last couple of records. They're mostly musicians who, you know, are really into the, you know, Omar and what he did. And I myself just found them unlistenable, even though I know that there's some really great songs buried in them.
Right.
I can't.
And I mean, we talk about all the time is ultimately what happens when you don't have anybody that you trust or use as a sounding board to kind of help you cull down ideas, because, you know, once you're so insulated, it's like everything's a good idea. And hey, I made these brilliant records, so everything I do is going to be brilliant. Right. Now, I like Bedlam and Goliath. I think there's some really great songs on that record, but you can see that kind of downward slope starting to happen on that record. There's a lot of just kind of noodly bullshit on there.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I guess to me, that's the stuff that I think there was this awesome balance on Deloused and the Comatorium. And when you hear, so after, you know, now I know that who John Theodore is and what his, you know, music, what he brings to the table when he's in a band.
Right.
And I can totally get that from Deloused and Francis the Mute. You know, like I can hear his contribution. I can hear what he's doing and how he's balancing what's going on in those records. And you know, when you don't have that, and it turns out he was a dissenting voice in the studio, you know, and so I think it's exactly right. When you lose that, when you lose a strong player who's bringing balance and who's voicing balance to the table, you just get this really lopsided, you know, viewpoint.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what you have there. But I mean, I would be excited to own one of these boxes. I mean,
well, sure, if somebody gifted it to me, I'd be stoked on it. But like, again,
yeah,
it's I think it's pretty expensive. Now, you know, you broke down the dollars and cents on it, and yeah, 2.5 mil is, I guess, in record industry speak, not a lot of money, but I don't know that I would imagine that the remastering has taken place incrementally over probably the last decade. Like, this is not just something they randomly decided to do. I imagine that they've been working on it almost since the demise of the band.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably not wrong. It's probably what the At the Drive-In reunion paid for, right? But it's like, I don't know. I mean, that stuff does take a long time. It's not usually you
it's
doing
typically
it,
the
then,
tracking and everything. Like, if you're making a record, the tracking is kind of the most labor intensive part, and then you send it off, and you know, it usually takes anywhere from 2 weeks to a month to get the masters right. And that's with bouncing it back and forth to the label and all the kind of middle parties. So I mean, ultimately, how many records are we talking about? That's at least 5 that I know of. There's probably more, and then there's the unreleased stuff.
Right, exactly. And the unreleased stuff, I guess they had a hard time finding. Anyway, I mean, to say it's not expensive to me is crazy. I mean, $500 for records I pretty much already own is a hard sell, right?
Yep. Right.
I would love to hear them, and I would love to be like do a side by side comparison.
Yeah, do an A/B.
Right, and see that I could hear the difference.
Right. Maybe Rick Rubin will let us use his super hi-fi system he has in his house to.
Oh, you mean we could do that? We could go to Shangri-La and he'd like let us hang out.
Yeah, he'd just A/B those records for us specifically,
And
we'd be like, "Hey, Rick, what did you do on Deloused in the Country?"
Well, man, mostly I held prayer beads and talked to these dudes about what your words they. It's funny because now I still listen to the podcast that he does with Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah,
and because they have lots of great guests, and I just listened to an episode that specifically he did with Dave Cobb.
Okay.
And I thought that it would be cool for you and I to like take that episode and like kind of tear it apart a little bit, but also just use them as two producers and kind of cross comparison, because it's basically Dave Cobb fanboying about Rick Rubin the whole episode. But it's good. You should listen to it, and I'd be interested to. We can go back at another time and kind of talk about it.
Yeah, you might change my mind about him. You never know.
You never know. Probably not. Okay, so Mars Volta. Anybody got the record? Like, leave us comments. Let us know what you think. If you got this box set, tell us what you hear differently, what you think about the art. We'd love to get comments. Send us emails. Give us a call on the phone.
Yeah. Put your number out there.
Yeah, put your number out there. We'll call you back. Anyway.